economics students. So we've got an evaluate question in this video, and this is really the dot point of the strengths and weaknesses of budgetary policy. Now you have to evaluate the use of budgetary policy, monetary policy, and aggregate supply policy. So it makes sense that we learn the structure so we can apply that to a range of different questions, right? Here's your question. Evaluate the use of budgetary policy over the past 2 years to achieve full employment. In this question, it's 4 marks. It could easily be 6 marks. It often is 6 marks. We're going to do 4 in this question. Pause it, have a think about how you would get the 4 marks. Okay, so here's my marking guide. Firstly, we obviously have to outline the strength of budgetary policy. Remember, evaluate means to look at the two sides, the strengths and the weaknesses. So we firstly have to outline the strength of budgetary policy. And what we need to do is evaluate its use in achieving full employment. So we have to make a relevant link to the goal of full employment. We're basically saying how this strength of the budget helps to achieve full employment. The third mark is for correctly outlining a weakness. So what is the weakness of budgetary policy? And then also making a link back to the goal. But in this case, we're saying how this weakness actually hurts the achievement of full employment or hinders the achievement of full employment. Okay, so here is a structure. One strength of budgetary policy is its ability to target certain areas or industries in the economy. This helps us to achieve the goal of full employment. However, budgetary policy is subject to political bias, which is the weakness, and this could hurt the achievement of our goal of full employment. So pause it, and I want you to think, how can you add to these 4 marks in order to make this a much better answer? Okay, so let's go to the first mark here. So we've outlined the strength, but we can definitely do more than this. This is a pretty brief outlining of the strength. So I'm going to say it's able to target certain areas of the economy, and I'm going to give an example. So this is a question about what happened in 2000 or over the past 2 years. So make it contemporary. Show off some of your knowledge of discretionary policies. So, for example, this year the government targeted the cost of living pressures by introducing excise tax cuts and one-off payments to households. Now, you don't necessarily have to get an example in there, but you do need to stretch out the weakness and make sure that it's the strength. But I think the best way to do that is using an example. All right, so we've said this helps the achievement of full employment. But why does this help the achievement of full employment? And really what we're doing here is we're making a very brief 1 mark how the budget works to increase AD and help us achieve full employment. Okay, so we're just doing that in 1 mark. So this helps us to achieve the goal of full employment. We should probably define full employment as well. So I've got in brackets here the 4 to 4.5% NAIRU. And then I've just linked back to the example again and said, the one-off cash payments to pensioners should help to stimulate aggregate demand when they spend it, which creates a demand for labour and reduces the level of unemployment. Okay, so it's a very brief, succinct link between the strength and the goal. So we're going to do the same for weaknesses now. So we've said, well, budgetary policy is subject to political bias. Well, why? What is political bias? So often budgetary policies, as you now know, will be used to buy votes rather than to improve the economy. Okay, that's the political bias part, and particularly in an election year like 2022. So then we've said, well, this will hurt the achievement of full employment, but why? And I've said this could hurt the achievement of full employment because this is a little bit tricky, this one. Of course, we always want the unemployment rate to go down so that more people have jobs. But in order to sort of link this weakness back to the goal of full employment, I've said during this election year, the government spent lots of money on infrastructure projects and other spending, cutting taxes. Those policies are politically favourable. They are, I would say they were in the hope that they would get re-elected, which unfortunately they didn't. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it. The problem here is that, in fact, if they stimulate the economy too much, then it could drive the unemployment rate too low. It hasn't yet, but it could go too low, and then it could create further inflationary pressures, and then it could really hurt the achievement of the NAIRU. Remember, that's the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. We're definitely not there yet, but if they stimulate the economy too much, well, theoretically, this could be bad for the achievement of full employment. Okay, so you might have some other things there you could throw in to improve the answer, and I hope you do. Okay, so I said it could be a 6 mark question. if it's a six-mark question, I actually think that this is closer to a six-mark answer. But if it's a six-mark question, you definitely have to get an example in there. So I've got the same marking guide, but I'm just using an example to illustrate the strength. So I've correctly outlined the strength, and then I've used an example to illustrate. Well, in my answer, I used an example anyway, but you get the drift. Same goes for the second one here. You need to definitely use an example. All right, now, how else could this question be asked? First of all, it says evaluate. You need to know that means to look at the strengths and weaknesses. But they may not always ask you to evaluate. They may say, hey, discuss the strengths and weaknesses of budgetary policy. It might even be outline one strength, outline one weakness. You do the same thing. As I said, we're asking for budgetary policy because that's what we're looking at the moment, but it could eventually be monetary policy and even aggregate supply policy. Same structure. And then, of course, as always, I could change any of the goals. I could change full employment to inflation or strong and sustainable growth or even living standards. All right, hopefully that helps you to answer the strength and weakness questions for budgetary policy. Bye for now.